Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. As I was thinking earlier, it is really trying to become spring out there. And I'm very appreciative of that. It's not really making it yet, but speaking of optimism, we're getting there. There's big fat buds. There's even crocuses. We're getting there. I'm Suzanne Molnar. I'm a member of the worship committee and doing a little bit of the service, which is mostly by Reverend Carol Badeau. We are a church which welcomes people of very divergent worldviews, theological beliefs, political beliefs, sexual orientation, gender identity, just place in the world. You are welcome. And we're talking today, or Carol is going to be talking about how to handle well, what you might say is a natural concomitant of this diversity. We don't agree with each other lots of the time, and how to handle that well. Let's see, I do announcements next, or I start the announcements. I don't really have any other than a reminder that we still have what we've called a share the plate partner. It's, you might say, a virtual plate. You may donate to it in a check sent to Westside or on our website under donate. And this month, or this quarter, our share the plate partner is the Unitarian Universalist Association, who, while being mostly invisible, provide all kinds of support for us and all the other congregations in the United States, and even a little more broadly than that. So I'm sure they can really use the support at present, while all the congregations really are meeting only virtually. Carol, you had an announcement?
I'm going to let Ellen go first. Ellen, you had an announcement?
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone that that our welcoming congregation program is an ongoing program and an ongoing effort. And we have a committee, we have a group, we're more of a team, I think, than a committee, but to work on the various tasks that we do throughout the year to keep up our welcoming congregation status, and just to show that we are intentionally welcoming. And we would love to have some more people on that committee. So
yes, we would.
If you would join us on that, we would love it. So let one of us know. Suzanne is on there, and I am, Barry, Reverend Carol, Gretchen,
Kayla,
definitely.
Yep. Great. All right, and I have an announcement. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Just a reminder that our Thursday evening conversations continue. Anyone is welcome to join us at any time. We have wonderful conversations. We range in topics from sort of spiritual topics to political topics to psychological topics. The next couple of weeks, Lynn Rankin is going to be talking about internal family systems and helping us understand how the concept of internal family systems works. So that's going to be interesting. And we're also doing some work with Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements, sort of woven through all that. We're also doing some conversations on racial equity and anti-oppression work. So those things are kind of woven together over the weeks, and we meet every Thursday evening from 6:30 to 8, and you are welcome to join us. You can find the information on our website, on our members area, or you can email me or Wendy. So announcements being complete, I'm going to sound our bowl before we light our chalice. So I'm going to invite the bowl to sound, just calling us into presence. And then Suzanne will have our words for our chalice light.
This is from Khalil Gibran. Say not, I have found the truth, but rather, I have found a truth. Say not, I have found the path of the soul. Say rather, I have met the soul walking upon the path. For the soul walks upon all paths.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yours.
So we're going to start this morning with a little bit of music. I'm going to share my screen with you all so that you can hear some music that is from the UUA that is about breathing and becoming present. And so this is really important when we are, when we're in situations of conflict. It's really important to be able to bring ourselves fully present, to calm ourselves down, and to find our center. So take a minute, take a deep breath, and let's just enjoy this music.
Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. Breathe in, I breathe out. Breathe in, I breathe out. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. Breathe in, I breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out.
So taking a breath. Today we're going to talk about conflict and dealing with conflict. The last year, I don't know about for you, but I'm guessing it's true for me, has required a lot of deep breathing. There's been a lot of take a deep breath in and let it out. It was almost exactly a year ago, March 13th of 2020, that the news came that we needed to immediately shut down our building due to SARS-CoV-19. I was in this building having meetings, just going about my day. And rumblings started coming in through email and people who were kind of coming through the building for various things saying, you know, something's happening. People are shutting down their businesses. And then the message from the denomination, from the Unitarian Universalist Association came in, and from the other congregations that said, shut down immediately. That was the bottom line. Shut down immediately. It was about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Everything changed in a second, just like that. I arrived in the office not even thinking about like this virus. It hadn't even occurred to me. And by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everything changed. At that point, now that was 1 year ago, but at that point, we were already a nation and a world under significant stress, right? Remember, fires in Australia were the big deal before that day. And political turmoil was a huge mess already. It got a lot worse before it started getting better too, right? So during times of immense stress and shock and upheaval, we really need tools to help us get through in a way that helps us stay whole. And we need those tools. Actually, it's really helpful if they're already in place before the crisis hits. Frequently, that's not the case. We have to kind of make them up as we go along. But it's helpful if we can have some tools in place to help us function better rather than struggle when we're actually in the middle of a crisis. I would say that we have made some progress as a country, as a community, as a world on all those fronts, political, medical, social. We're making progress. Spring is coming, as Suzanne said. Spring is actually kind of starting to get here. But it's not over, and none of the stressors that we're talking about are just going to instantly disappear. So what tools do we actually need to be continuing moving forward? We can expect there to be a lot of conflict in the coming years. So breathing, of course, is a good essential first tool for ourselves internally. Knowing how to slow down, how to pause, sometimes take an all-out stop just to get our bearings and to breathe. And remember, that's not just like a metaphorical technique, folks. It actually changes our nervous system. When we breathe slowly, our nervous systems get the message that that's not an emergency, right? So just breathing more slowly will tell your nervous system to stop sending out so much adrenaline, to slow down the cortisol levels, and you will actually start to feel better. So that's a practical tool. But we also need some other tools for acting in the world, right? One of the tools that Unitarian Universalist communities tend to put in place is something called a covenant. And some of us are familiar with these and other people are not. So let's start with that. What the heck is a covenant? Westside actually has a covenant of respectful relations, but it's not something many of us know about. And we actually were talking about this in one of our adult RE groups recently because we created a covenant. So what's a covenant? A covenant, let's start with what it's not. It is not a contract. It is not a set of rules. It's not laws. Covenants come from the heart. So they're agreements that we make. It's a pact we make with other people that we care about to be in good relationship with them. So things that are in the Westside Covenant of Respectful Relations, for example, include agreements to treat each other with respect, to address conflicts directly and openly rather than to talk about each other behind our backs, right? To listen, to actually listen with open minds and open hearts, to engage in a democratic process and make decisions collectively. And then when we make a decision collectively, since it's been a democratic decision, to abide by it rather than spending a lot of time talking about how it's wrong. Our covenant here as a congregation is designed to help us hold ourselves and one another accountable to our basic values and our principles while keeping us in a healthy relationship with one another. And that can be darn tricky. Holding those two things at the same time, holding each other accountable and ourselves accountable and also staying in relationship is a complicated thing. So here's a question for you to contemplate. How many times have you experienced internally, an internal conflict between staying in relationship with someone and holding them accountable for words or actions that you felt were harmful? How many times have you decided you just wouldn't say anything because you didn't want to damage the friendship or the partnership or the family or the club or the whatever, right? Or conversely, how many times have we maybe spoken out quickly, angrily, in ways that we ultimately regretted because our responses, maybe the emotion was justified, but the way we ended up responding ended up increasing harm. So these two things, holding ourselves and each other accountable and staying in relationship, that takes some balancing. How do we resolve that tension between those two things? And at the same time, acknowledge that we're human. We are all going to mess up. We are all growing. We all have blind spots. And in times like this, when there's a lot of possible conflict out there, political conflict, social conflict, values conflicts, how do we hold ourselves accountable and also allow ourselves to be human? How do we hold each other accountable and allow each other to be human? So a covenant is a good starting tool for that. For example, marriage is said to be a covenant. It's not just a contract. It's like an agreement that you hold in your heart and you strive to live by it from the heart because you care. You congregations use covenants in youth groups, in classes. Our board actually has a covenant that we use for how we function as a board. So a covenant can do lots of things, but just saying, like as our covenant might, that we'll address issues and behaviors rather than people and personalities, it doesn't necessarily make that easy to do. Just because we say we're going to do it doesn't mean it's easy, right? We, as a community, Unitarian Universalists in general, have a reputation for being people who are willing to call out, that's the phrase, call out, when others are doing harm in our communities or in our society as a whole. We advocate for justice. We proclaim our values on the streets, but we don't necessarily always know how to do that in ways that keep us in relationship with the people we disagree with. So there's a new concept that's been being taught and shared lately that I think is really helpful on this front. There are articles about it in the activism world, and it's starting to spread into other arenas. And I think this is really helpful. So you may know the term calling out. Calling out is a term that's used to describe publicly naming an action, whether that's somebody spoke words or somebody did an action that caused harm or was perceived to cause harm. So we've been, for many years, this is the older term, calling out, often when we see discrimination or injustice, right? We might call out a racist system or a racist comment. And we might call out when someone violates our covenant. And that's essential. It's really an essential way to courageously name and identify and hopefully change oppressive systems and habits. But it also has the reputation, sometimes rightfully, of being a harmful practice that destroys relationships. So the new alternative that's being proposed is calling in, which is different. It's a way of naming and addressing behaviors or words that might cause harm or reveal bias while still allowing us to remain in open, caring relationship with one another. So here are some good examples. I might have a young adult call me in when I say something that is unknowingly heteronormative, that privileges heterosexuality, right? Having colleagues remind me or call me in when I prioritize my own perspective over those of communities of color on social issues. Calling in might look like asking a friend or family member not to use certain words or phrases in my presence, right? Saying that I'm really uncomfortable with those words or phrases. So let's talk for a minute about what the distinctions are between calling out, which is an older, more familiar concept, and this newer concept of calling in. I'm not gonna directly quote this agency, but some of the places where I got some of my ideas about this the Vermont National Education Association chapter has a website you can check out that offers a really good summary of these concepts. And during coffee hour, I'll put the link to that in the chat so you all can see it. But basically, calling out is what we use when we need to have an immediate stop in a certain action. So it's a way of saying, absolutely no, right now that needs to stop. If we're in a conversation, if we're in a situation with other people where something's happening and we need to intervene to prevent harm, okay? And that often will feel abrupt and kind of upsetting. There's a level of like shock and disruption that goes with calling out, okay? So you might be saying, oh, whoa, like that's what you just said is not okay with me. I'm really uncomfortable with that. Or something like, hey, that violates our covenant. That's not part of our values as a community. Or you might say, you know, you might not realize it, but that you're talking about me and that really hurt. Those are ways of calling out. It's an immediate disruptive stop to a behavior, okay? Calling out disrupts because disruption is necessary for the well-being of the immediate situation. And it's really important to know how to do that. I would say that frequently we are afraid to do that. Humans have a tendency to be afraid to disrupt because we're afraid of the social consequences for disrupting, okay? Now, there are times when calling in is a better tool, and that's often when we're in a situation where we're in relationship with other people, and keeping that relationship healthy and moving is important to us, all right? So in that situation, we can use calling in as a way of still expressing disagreement, difference, but inviting us to go deeper in our relationship, to grow our mutual understanding of one another, or to find richer meaning for ourselves in the world together. It's helpful when we are willing to seek to understand the other person's experience better. So frequently when we're in a situation where we feel there's harm happening, we just want the harm to stop. We're not really interested in what the other person is experiencing. Calling in is a really good tool both to allow us to let the other person have a say and also to remind us to be curious. It helps us remember that we need to be curious what the other person's experience is. And it allows there to be multiple perspectives in the room. So calling out is generally a declarative statement, right? It's like, stop, that's not okay, here's what I feel. Calling in is usually more of a question. Usually starts with a word like how or why or what. So what do you mean by that? What was your intention when you said that? Who or what were you referring to? You might ask someone, like, have you ever thought about how that might impact someone when you say it that way? Have you ever wondered what the person hearing that might feel like? Or you might be curious about, how did you come to that perspective? I don't mean, well, how did you come to that perspective? But I'm really seriously curious. I don't understand that. That is different than my perspective. How did you get there, right? Calling in really, it means having the courage to ask, what are you who are different than me and are expressing something that makes me feel ouch, what are you feeling right now? What is going on for you? How did you come to that perspective? And it also means having the courage to be vulnerable enough to say, can you see how that I'm feeling hurt right now? Not, hey, you stop it, you're bad, but, ooh, I'm feeling some pain. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling a little scared. That's a different kind of courage. So for me, I see this new tool of calling in as really essential in UU communities, particularly in UU communities. One, because we like to talk about controversial topics, right? And two, we're in relationship. So because we are that kind of a community, we actually need this tool particularly. If we intend to actually live our values, and I mean actually live our values, not just outside the walls, where of course virtual walls right now, But not just we want to live our values when we're out in the bigger world, but we want to live them in the community. We have to be willing to start doing these things. We have to start to embody these values more. And if we're going to do that, we have to call one another in. That takes courage and kindness. We have to commit to this balance of holding one another accountable and ourselves accountable to these values that we state. And we also have to hold ourselves and one another in care, right? In compassion and in relationship, which is hard to do when we're hurting. If we're hurting, it is hard to be holding another person in compassion and care. So we need to do this. It's going to be growing muscles. It's going to take practice. We are, as a community, going to see things differently. You know, right now in a sort of the cycle of what we're talking about, our themes for worship, we're talking about what's true from the past and who are we? What do we care about? Who are we as a people? Who are we? We are people who see things differently. In a couple of weeks, our worship team is going to be presenting a service about the 6 sources. You know, typically when we're in Unitarian Universalist settings, we talk about the 7 principles, which pretty much everybody's seen, and we pretty much all agree on the 7 principles. But we don't talk as much about the 6 sources, which is where we have a lot of disagreement. Okay? We are a people who come from very different places. And this is true that, of course, when we go back out in the world, even greater difference occurs. So this is a really helpful skill to have. We each have our own reactions, our own emotional sensitivities, our own passions, our own issues that we care about. And we all have blind spots, often in the areas that aren't our highest priority. So we need to be able to kind of help one another see where we might need to grow, right? It's helpful to have people who care about us be willing to say, you know what, maybe you want to think about how you just framed that. Is there a way that maybe you could expand your framework there, right? We don't have to call each other out, though. And Unitarian Universalists in the past have had a habit of calling each other out and hurting each other's, hearts. We hurt each other's hearts. We hurt each other's spirits when we do that sometimes. Sometimes it's necessary. But just as often, it's really, really a good place to call each other in. So I would invite us all to take a minute. I just described that in a very intellectual way, right? But these are things that happen not in an intellectual framework. We might get into an intellectual conversation, but it's not our intellect that reacts when we're feeling upset. That's not the part of us that's having the response. It's our emotions. So I invite you to take a second and just call to mind a situation that for you might require calling in or calling out. Maybe it's with a family member, a partner, a friend. Maybe it's in the congregation. Maybe it's in a conversation we've had here. Think of a situation in which you wanted to call somebody out or you got called out, and just take a breath. And notice that that brings up feelings. Let us breathe in together and out. Let us breathe in for a moment together and out. And one last time, to let that idea sink into our bodies. The image of actually calling each other in and what that might feel like. The possibility and the vulnerability of it. Let's not just leave that kind of bubbling in our brains. Like, I really invite you to let that sink into your body. Breathing in, we bring in peace. Breathing in, we expand our nervous systems and our ability to calm ourselves. And then when we breathe out, we have a greater ability to breathe out words and presence in a way that is loving. I hope that we can begin to practice that together. It's a concept that I am really taking to heart myself because I think it's an alternative we need. So we're going to be going into coffee hour in a minute, and we can talk about how that feels for us. But I'm going to extinguish our chalice first. As our service ends and we go into that time when we share together, we extinguish the light of the physical chalice, but we don't extinguish the light that guides our search for truth. We were talking about this in our class last week. You know, we say the light of truth, but there are many truths. So really the light doesn't represent one truth, it represents the search for truth. It also represents the fire of our commitment to our values and the warmth of being together as we explore that. We carry those in our hearts and hopefully into a time of growing and learning together. So go in peace.